Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Harkey. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. This is Canaries in the Coal Mine. You can find our future webinars and past webinar movies at tour.infotex.com. Last month's webinar is already available. And so, now for the main event. I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, the awareness guru of Indiana, the man with 13 letters after his name, and they all spell incident response, Dan Hadaway. Dan?
Thank you very much, Michael. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us in our April webinar. I always like to start my webinars with a shout out, and this time the shout out is going to one of our newer employees, Sophia, because you will see in this webinar she's been drawing some things for us here, and so I just figure I might as well put it right out there that Sophia is the one that is coming up with our awareness posters now, which are free on the my.infotex.com website, and she's also drawing some pretty good drawings to help articulate some of the concepts we're trying to get across to our clients and such. So today we're going to talk about canaries in the coal mine, and I recognize that some of our audience might not understand the metaphor. They might be of an age where they haven't really heard the metaphor used very often because it's something that really kind of went away with the advent of technology, right? But the theory is that in the old days, people would put a canary in a cage in the coal mine, and if the canary was dead, that was their sign that, hey, we better get out of here. There must be some poison gas, or, you know, you must not be getting enough air down here or whatever. And so the metaphor has always been used to, you know, signify that, you know, a canary in a coal mine is a sign that something bad is about to happen. And so, speaking of Sophia, when I originally decided to do this webinar, I was like, hey, can you draw me a sick canary? I want to be able to show not a dead canary, but a sick canary, because, and as you'll learn here, what we see as auditors whenever we go in and audit a bank or a credit union or a hospital is what we're actually seeing are sick canaries, hopefully not dead canaries, right? And so Sophia came up with this drawing, and she's a new employee, and so I'm thinking, boy, does Sophia know how to draw birds? And so when she drew the healthy canary for me, I realized, okay, that really is a sick canary. And you know, I had my iconography that I needed from my webinar, but thank you very much, Sophia. Let's just start right off talking about those dead birds. You know, I mean, and I know that a lot of you smaller banks are experiencing a phenomenon now where customers are coming into your branches saying, hey, if your mouse cursor is moving and you're not touching it, you know, what does that mean? And so we now have a whole attack vector we call the corporate account takeover, or the CATO, that many of us have experienced firsthand, or that we've heard of our peers going through. Likewise, you know, if you get notice of a delivery and it's to an address that's not yours, you might already have some kind of a breach going on in your system. What, you know, managed security service providers are very proud of is that, you know, I mean, the main thing that shouldn't happen if you have somebody watching your network for you is you shouldn't have a situation where your internet comes to a crawl because of exfiltration, because somebody's hacked into your network and they're starting to send data out of your network. But if you do see that going on, you've definitely, it's already kind of too late. Unfortunately, a lot of us are experiencing, not us going through ransomware, knock on wood, but, you know, peers of ours, or, you know, again, banks and credit unions have customers coming into the branch saying, what do I do? You know, I can't get to your online banking site. It has this weird warning up, and I only have, of my 12 hours, I have an hour and a half left. You know, I mean, that's definitely a sign of a dead bird, not a sick bird. And so I guess the question you might want to ask yourself is, if you're discovering written passwords on a regular basis as you walk around your operation, or if you have loan officers that still have piles of paper all over their office, at least, you know, in between audits, you know, if you have an issue where people are calling up asking for information that we're really not supposed to give them, you know, we already have dead birds in our operation, don't we? We already have a few breaches happening here and there. I know a lot of us are experiencing situations where, you know, maybe we're emailing information to the wrong person, or, you know, I ran across a client where they actually experienced snail mail, you know, information going to the wrong person. So, you know, I mean, it's a minor incident. It's only one individual. You know, I mean, gosh, the question is do we even report this like it's a security incident, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that it's not just, it's not like a coal mine where you're either going to, you know, have a bird that's alive or you're going to have an explosion. The situation we have with the use of technology is that there's varying degrees of incidents occurring on a regular basis. And so as an auditor, what we do is we come in and we look for the sick birds. We look for symptoms of problems that, hey, if you fix this problem, there will be a large payoff. The addressing of a particular issue mitigates enough risk to where it would be worth your while to invest in whatever it takes to address these sick birds, so to speak. And so I've been talking at great length now, you know, pretty much everywhere I go now about the fact that the main sick bird we see, the number one indicator that you're going to have an issue is that you don't have a security culture in place. And the first time I heard this concept, I mean, we've heard this concept for a long time, but the first time I heard it in a regulatory environment was when an examiner told a bank, a client of ours, that, you know, I don't think you have a security culture. And when the bank responded by asking, well, what do you mean? What is a security culture? You know, how can this be an exam finding is what, you know, my original reaction was. You know, the examiner said, I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. And so ever since then, and that was a couple of years ago, I've been spending a lot of my philosophy time, which I end up in a lot of discussions with people about the philosophy of information security. And I've come to the conclusion that that examiner was right on. I mean, there certainly isn't a guidance that says you must establish a security culture because it's very intangible. It's something that's very hard to describe. But I know it when I see it. And more importantly, I know when it's not there, when I don't see it. And as an auditor, it's very, very obvious. If you're still putting together your request for information response the day I show up for the on-site work, that in itself is a sick bird. By the way, Sophia, thank you for drawing the IT manager character that's starting to pop up in some of my presentations here. But let's face it, audit readiness is the number one indicator as to whether we're ready not only for the auditors and the examiners, but also for the bad guys, for that when instead of if. And so if you're not ready for your audit, that's where you might want to start. You might want to start with, you know, a hand up to your management team in a stop manner. And you might want to start off by explaining to your management team that we need to have some time in this busy schedule of ours to make sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's so that we can be ready for that audit, because it indicates usually when we aren't ready for the audit that we don't have the right budget, we don't have the right staffing, that we don't have trained personnel, or that we're just receiving way too much new work to do, new technology deployments for the amount of staff we have now, and that maybe we should outsource to some of these companies that are popping up that help smaller community-based banks and credit unions with the technology deployment processes. I run into now a lot of people new to the information security world who's been through their first audit, but they're still rather new. And in reaction to their first audit, they're like, okay, we're never going to deal with that again. And so let's design an audit that we know we can pass. I've seen this in SOC 2s actually, where, you know, you can tell by reading the SOC 2 or the SOC 1 that the service organization has been stung by an audit, and so now they're very careful about the controls they declare, and they're not having audits look at the area where there probably is more risk because we have new controls in place, because we're deploying new technology. TMI, I see audits where the management team has gotten involved in the audit, but the only extent of their involvement is to warn the auditees that you got to be careful. Just answer the question the way the question is worded. Don't offer too much information. I've seen, organizations where the management team's role is to go through what was going to be submitted in the request for information response and remove documents that they've decided would qualify as TMI. Those are sick birds. Those organizations are organizations that might have a false sense of security in place. And by the way, you might recognize sick birds across the board here. You might recognize them in your organization, or maybe a lot of us are like, yeah, I remember when that was the case in my organization. Thank goodness for the XYZ guidance that finally pulled enough of my management team's heads out of the sand so that we're not experiencing this anymore. But I also want you to know that this webinar does lead towards the solution to these sick birds that, we could go on and on forever. You're probably wondering if Mike's going to come in with one of his interruptions, because we could go on and on forever with a list of the things that we see when we're auditing organizations that indicate there's going to be a problem here if there isn't already problems that maybe they're doing a pretty good job of covering up, or that maybe they're not in banking do I recognize this, but I've been in organizations outside of banking where they've got major issues and they aren't even aware of them. So if we're taking a look at security every time we take a look at something, then we have a security culture in place. So, if it's a new idea, hey, how about we do this? I noticed that the credit union down the street is implementing XYZ on their mobile banking application. If part of the discussion is, I wonder how they're controlling the risk related to that, we have a security culture in place. But if the discussion is all about when are we going to deploy that technology, and we haven't talked to the IT department yet about the operational security and reputational risk associated with that technology, and therefore we're not really taking a multidisciplinary approach towards the security. We've got everybody involved in creating the problem, but it's up to the IT department to actually fix the problem. We've got a situation where security is bolted on, not built in, right? And so what we see in most smaller organizations, larger organizations, it really, the size of the organization doesn't matter really, is the management team out there making sure that we've got the cart out in front of the horse and we're rolling out technology prematurely. And the good news is we've got the management team vested. They're interested in the technology. They're driving the push for new technology. The bad news is we need to educate the management team on their primary role, which is to determine which technologies to roll out and when, but it's also to help establish the security culture. That the primary sick bird that we see when we audit an organization, the number one problem that's creating a whole bunch of symptoms, is that intangible, that establishment of the security culture. And so what I'd like to do really here is go ahead and, Michael, I'm going to get the Jeopardy song going this time, I hope. But I'd like to go ahead and have Michael launch a poll. And as soon as this song's up, hopefully we'll be ready to move on.
Yeah, if you could all take a moment to fill out the poll, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, Mike, hold those results, okay? Hold those results. Because what I'd like to talk about for the rest of the webinar here is where you can go if while I was walking through those sick birds, you saw a little bit too much of yourself in there, or you could look at this webinar as a, hey, you know what, I'd like my management team to go watch that movie once Infotex has it available, because I feel like they will help them understand why I led them through the battlefields we had to be led through in order to get to where we are now. Because I'm proud that there aren't that many sick birds in my organization. I'm proud that I have a security culture. And so if you need to direct your management team to the part of the movie that's the most important part for them, it's the one I'm starting right now, which is basically the management team's role in IT governance. And first and foremost, it starts with making sure that we are aligning technology to the business plan of the organization. And so at the bank, at the credit union, you need to have a business plan, or else technology isn't going to work as effectively for you as it does for your competitor. And so management needs to understand that hey, you know, the need for a business plan is now greater than it ever has been before. Maybe not as much because we want to know where we're taking our business, which is the number one, you know, purpose of a business plan, right? But maybe it's more because we want to align technology with that business plan. And so as an IT auditor, way too often we hear the pushback when it comes to technology planning that, well, we really don't have a business plan to base our technology plan upon. Well, the management team needs to step up to the place on that. We need to get a documented business plan so that the IT people, so the information security people can align the technology strategy with that business plan. And so that's the first and foremost, the most important role of management when it comes to their role in helping us govern technology. Now, beyond that, you know, we've talked again and again, you know, since the mid-'80s about return on investment in technology. We've went through a period of time where we just rolled our eyes whenever we heard those three words associated with technology. Way back in the day, we probably saw our first return on tech, you know, investment right before our very eyes, and fortunately, we've been seeing that from a tangible perspective ever since, you know, the early aughts, you know, in 2001, 2002, when we started rolling out internet banking and that sort of thing. We are also seeing an intangible return, and yes, I will agree that most of our spending, most of our resources dedicated to security are intangible returns. That it's kind of hard to make the business case for the firewall, but if we don't have the firewall in place, there won't be a business to make the case for. That's definitely, you know, something that management now understands. And I think management understands that their role is to go to conferences, to see what our competitors are doing, to monitor technology development in as much as it helps us achieve our business objectives, and to help the IT people determine when is the appropriate time to deploy new technologies. And then finally, help us manage the risk of the new technologies, but also the risk that we face, because especially nowadays, we're not really deploying the technologies ourselves. There's a vendor involved in assisting with the technology. The days of outsourcing are well past us, and now everything is outsourced. And so the management team needs to help with the risk exposure that we're both, you know, when we need to remember, and we need to remind our management team that the reason why we are outsourcing the particular technology is because of risk. You know, we're outsourcing the development of our core to a third party who's in the business of developing cores, because we don't want to take on all the risk of, you know, programming and writing our own core processor, et cetera, et cetera. And so it really is about risk management. And so management needs to help us measure and determine how much risk are we exposed to when we bring in this new technology, when we change vendors, when we use information in this new manner. And it really is about helping us understand that, because when we see banks and credit unions and financial institutions who are very far ahead of the rest of the world when it comes to security, and so, you know, we don't see them fail as often and as hard as we see the Targets and the Home Depots and the, you know, Neiman Marcuses of the world fail. But banks still fail, and usually when we see it from a technology perspective, it's because they've gotten in a hurry. and management has cut some corners. They haven't conducted a risk assessment. They haven't done the appropriate vendor due diligence, and they've come up with reasons why they don't need to dot the I's and cross the T's, rather than dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And so, in summary, really, we can say that the management team's role is to determine which technologies are going to facilitate our business tactics, and then to determine when to deploy those technologies, and then, of course, help us with the search and selection process so that we can properly deploy those technologies in a manner that is risk-free, or at least risk-adverse, or, doesn't have as much risk as it would if we didn't put the horse in front of the cart. Obviously, negotiating contracts, implementing, the new technology, and then performing due diligence on an ongoing basis. It's not done once we're done rolling out the technology. We need to circle back around for critical vendors, maybe on an annual or every other year basis, and at least once every 3 years on all of our vendors, just to make sure that they haven't, changed enough to where the risk profile when we first hired them is different than it is to date. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking to the management team, if they are dialed in, about the fact that since the 60s, the management team of a bank has really been involved in the use of Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovation theory. And really what this theory is about, we've all, we use the language from this theory. Hopefully most banks have kind of decided in general by now where they want to be when it comes to deployment of new technology. And what Everett Rogers basically establishes that as time goes on, the features and sophistication associated with the technology get better, while the price and the problems associated with that technology get better as well. The price comes down, the number of problems are smaller and of lower impact. And so what Everett Rogers has basically established is that, if you're an early adopter of technology, you're paying a higher price for less sophistication and more problems. Whereas if you hold on and you wait and you wait and you wait, and you're like most community banks, and you deploy technology, somewhere in the late majority or laggard phase of deployment, you're actually getting a better price, and you have fewer problems that you're experiencing. And so, interestingly, Everett Rogers also predicted that you could use the market figures, the statistics we're getting from market penetration of a technology to determine exactly where you are in that adoption curve. And so, once, if you decide that in general you want to be an early majority adopter of technology, which is usually where, aggressive banks are. They're certainly not an early adopter of technologies. Maybe Chase and Bank of America are. There might be even out there innovating the new technologies. But once the press starts showing that a quarter of the population has adopted a particular technology, and this is where we want to be, then we start doing our risk assessments. Then we start putting it into the plan, et cetera, so that in the early majority phase of adoption, our bank pulls the triggers. Our bank goes through the hoops they need to go through to deploy that technology. And so what I've noticed, I've been working with banks since 2000, and what I've noticed is that in general, banks want to be, and again, this isn't every bank across the board, but the most of the banks I work with are smaller community-based banks. I work with quite a few credit unions these days, and in general, they want to be late majority or early majority adopters of technology. I have quite a few clients, by the way, that are proud to say we're laggards. We're going to wait until everybody else has worked out all the bugs, and then we're going to deploy the technology. And they spend a lot less money on security. They do it right the first time, every time. There is nothing wrong with being a laggard as long as your marketing team is okay with the competitive implications of that. And if you're in the middle of nowhere, Indiana, a lot of times you don't have to worry about those competitive pressures. What I've also noticed, though, is that when it comes to technologies that increase risk, like remote access, banks sometimes and credit unions are late to the table. They're laggards even when there's no real good reason to be. I mean, remote access has been secured for at least a decade now, and banks and credit unions all over America are now waking up to the fact that they don't have to get up and go into the office if they don't want to in 2017. Likewise with social media, you know, banks were just laggards. I have a lot of clients that are still proud to not have a Facebook page, and it works for them. It makes sense. The best way to secure yourself in the use of information or technology is to just simply not use it. Mobile applications, we're all proud of our mobile apps, and they can do some pretty funky things, but believe it or not, mobile apps were out there as early as 2007, 2008, and I know it kind of almost sounds like I'm making fun of banks here, and I kind of intend to do that because I am proud of the fact that banks are early adopters, early majority at the latest, when it comes to technologies that relate to information security and physical security, of course. You know, banks were using video surveillance far longer before everybody else started using them. Banks are really the people that blaze the trail when it comes to video surveillance. And by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but us auditors, this is the reason why if you're saying that we're waiting for the auditors to tell us we need to do this, you probably don't have a security culture in your organization, because I don't know if you've noticed here, but auditors always develop their audit checklist once we start seeing enough of our clients using the technology to where we know we're going to audit it on a regular basis. Okay, and so if you're waiting for your auditor to tell you how to secure something, you're really missing the point, in my opinion. You're actually waiting for the bad guy to help you secure something, because very often bad guys are aware of vulnerabilities and threats before auditors are. Okay, and I'm just, you know, hey, I've been poking fun at banks for the last 5 minutes. I might as well make banks aware and credit unions aware of the fact that we can't rely on our auditors to help us secure technologies. Meanwhile, secure messaging is my great example. You know, I have a lot of financial institution clients. Well, I mean, almost all of my non-financial institution clients still have not deployed secure messaging. They're still waiting for the business case to deploy secure messaging, whereas most banks had a secure messaging system in place, what, 2010, 2011. So, you know, we do have a conscious approach as a bank or as a credit union in terms of when we're going to deploy technologies, and the management team plugs in on that approach. But how does the management team motivate a security culture? That's the real question. If, you know, and again, I've said this ever since I started thinking about the whole notion of having a security culture in place, is that banks already have a really good security culture compared to the other organizations that I work with. I'm working with, you know, healthcare organizations that are just now waking up to the regulations that were supposed to be in place in 2003, right, 14 years ago. And they're now realizing that, hey, maybe we should do something about this, okay? And so I want to make sure that you realize that if you're in a bank or a credit union, you already have a pretty good security culture in place. But if you want to make yourself more secure, the management team and if you want to make things easier for yourself, the management team has to help with that security culture. That we want to take that security culture to the next level. And so what did banks do? You know, why did banks become early adopters of technologies related to security? I think that it's primarily because of the regulators. I started Infotex with an accounting firm in the year 2000 to serve healthcare organizations, and for 3 years we were told over and over and over again, there's no such thing as the HIPAA security police. Nobody's going to come in and slap our hands because we're not doing these stupid things that you want us to do, like using strong passwords, okay? Banks, on the other hand, they had the benefit of the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council and the concern on a lot of people's minds that if we can roll out online banking, it would be great for our economy, but if we do it, we better do it in a manner that's secure, or it would destroy our economy, right? And so the banks actually, they actually built security in instead of bolted it on. And so that's one way to create an information security culture, is to say, hey, we're going to get out ahead of the examiners. We're not going to wait for the bad guys to tell us how to secure something. We're going to build security into our approach instead of bolt it on. Or we can do what Paris did, or what France did. And it's my understanding, and I know quite a few people in the Homeland Security Department, you know, people, I've got cousins that are in the FBI, et cetera, and there was a time when France was kind of, you know, looked at by, you know, other people in the war on terror as a country that wasn't really coming along quickly, and that wasn't, you know, I mean, establishing a security culture, so to speak, in the war on terror until Friday the 13th, 2015. And this is actually Friday the 14th, 2015. That's the Eiffel Tower there, so France, they definitely established a security culture. They're one of the leaders now in the war on terror, and so the point I guess I'm trying to make here in almost a tongue-in-cheek manner is that your management team needs to realize that they are what stands between the bank having a profitable year and all that risk management that the bank and the credit union does around loan risk pays off, or the management team is the organization that doesn't establish that security culture and that waits for examiners, regulators, lawyers, litigators, your customers, and third parties to come in and tell you how to secure your organization. Because if we don't preach and establish that security culture, we're going to end up in a situation where we have a very bad breach and somebody else is telling us how to secure our system. And so, you know, I've been talking about security being bolted on, not built in. I've been talking about those organizations that see security as the responsibility of IT and not everybody. I've been talking about, you know, audit preparation is only about warning against TMI and let's review our request for information and responses. And those are the organizations where when there is a breach, because it's a matter of when for those with the security culture, not if. I'm not saying that having a security culture makes you, you know, inoculated from the woes of technology, but it puts you in a much better position to where there are less breaches, and when there is a breach, they aren't of black swan impact. Mike, how are we doing on the poll?
Dan, the poll I'm sharing now, we had 29% said both at least monthly, often more.
Good.
And then we had 43% said they meet, or I'm sorry, we had 29% say at least monthly, often more, and at least quarterly, often more. And we have 43% say at least annually, often more. 0, I never meet with my board.
Okay, well then I feel like that's very good news for everybody, the whole notion that you've never met with your board. If you're an information security officer, the more you meet with your board, the better. And what we're seeing over the course of time, the more the information security people, for those of you who are not a financial institution, the more the information security people meet with the ownership of the organization to talk about technology risk, the better off you are going to be. The more secure you're going to be, the less sick birds you're going to have in your organization. And I'd say starting about 5 years ago in banks, I started seeing banks wake up to that notion. And so I know a lot of people dialed into this are not from financial institutions, a lot are. But if you're, and I know that some credit unions are still struggling to get their information security people in front of their board. If you're an organization that feels like, hey, the board's serious now, but can you keep your presentation to 10 minutes? We run into that, you know, on a regular basis. You know, just so you know, we can keep our presentation to 5 minutes if you'd like. And what I'm talking about here is presenting the results of an audit report. Heck, I can go over an audit in 1 minute. But does that mean your bank, are you really saying your board is serious? And so now out of a 4-hour meeting, because let's face it, we know the board is working their butts off nowadays. You know, board of directors have never worked harder than they have to in 2017. But if you're willing to give up 10 minutes of a 4-hour meeting, that's fine, but that's not serious, in our opinion. In a security culture, and I accidentally put 2 bird sets on here, and I just wanted to show you this is kind of what it looks like. I asked Sophia to draw what a security culture looks like in Canary speak. Okay, and so, you know, they're flying together, they're working together, but more importantly, one of the giveaways that Michael's going to be going or handing out, or I don't know how you do it nowadays, Mike, but there is a do we have a security culture control self-assessment is what it is. And so Michael has made sure that you have a copy of this. All of this is a boilerplate by Infotex. All of our boilerplates have a template, and you know, there's a transfer copyright agreement that you can figure out on your own. And then we've kind of developed our own maturity scale here in terms of the capability maturity model, and I'm not going to go into that in very much detail. But my point I want to make is that if your organization is the type of organization where you can sit down with your board and walk through a questionnaire like this, and this is not a light questionnaire, it's 25 questions. Well, it's going to take more than 10 minutes, okay? But if you can walk through this with your board, you have a security culture in place. All right, and so I encourage you to, and by the way, customize this, you know, make this your own. All of our boilerplates are just merely starting points. They're meant to get you started in the right direction. But what this is if you just, based on these maturity levels here on the second tab, is you basically say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 5, we're at a 3, we're at a 5, and this calculates the risk that you face based on what maturity level you're at. And it's more, however you rate it is, you know, we could go on for hours just about how you rate each of these findings, but it's the questions themselves that you might want to ask your board, because the board of directors must become aware of the threats and the vulnerabilities that the organization faces, or else it's an uphill battle every step of the way. Likewise, another giveaway that Mike's going to hand out to everybody is, and this is really for those of you who are not banks or credit unions, this might be interesting for you, and you might share this with your owners. But this is now a checklist that most of your auditors are working off of. We've decided to go ahead and let you have our audit checklist. And so if we come in to audit you, and this is for a bank, but you know, it's very similar for the credit unions. But if we were to audit you, and awareness training was part of what we're looking at in the audit scope, we would walk your board minutes through all these questions right here. And so take a look at these 24 questions. Are these illustrated in your board minutes? And by the way, there's a lot more than 24 things you could be talking to your board about. But the point of this is the dialogue that the information security officer or information security manager or CISO or whoever it is that your title, your role, the person who's responsible for escalating risk in your organization has, the dialogue that that person has with your board of directors is going to be what creates a strong security culture versus a security culture that was of the strength of France until Friday the 13th, 2015.
Hey, Dan, can you enlarge that just for a moment and kind of scroll up and down?
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Mike. Let me see here. Let's just go to, let's see what 100, well, that doesn't do us a lot of good. Let's go up to 130%. And so, you know, this is a typical Infotex checklist, by the way. It's got questions over here, and then this does not use our maturity scale, so it's just, you're just measuring the risk on a scale of 1 to 8. What's the likelihood of you saying no to this question causing issues? On a scale of 1 to 5, what's the impact? And so we use this when we audit a bank. We go in there, we grab their, you know, and a lot of banks don't want us to walk out with their board minutes, or they'll give us redacted copies of their board minutes. You know, we're very big about, we classify their board minutes as critical information, and so we're very, very careful about how we protect their board minutes. Hopefully we can go into their boardroom, review their board minutes, and leave with the checklist and nothing else but the checklist. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we then risk rank the findings here, and so the results of this end up giving us a feel for how well is the ISO doing at going in and presenting information to the board that may or may not be required by guidance. That checklist, along with the security culture checklist that you probably couldn't see very well either, are two really good tools that you can use even if you feel like, hey, we already have a good security culture, even if you're meeting with your boards at least monthly. This is, I have no doubt that the people who are in that camp, who are already meeting with their board regularly, they're going to probably pull these checklists out and go through them anyway, because they're looking for, hey, what else should I be telling my board about? Because they've learned through experience that if my board's aware of the XYZ control, the XYZ control is enforced. Okay, and it's that simple. And so anyway, thank you for that drawing, Sophia. What we're noticing is those organizations that are very prepared for their audit are finding it's easy. They're finding security a lot easier than those organizations who are not prepared for their audit. It's that simple. Expectations are being met. People aren't frustrated with their technology as much as they are. I mean, we're never going to get completely over what I call the American monkey trap, the fact that technology never works, right? But when compliance is not the driver, okay, when compliance is just the result, it's just a matter of making sure we dotted our I's and crossed our T's, we have a security culture. When you look at them and you talk to them about developing their incident response team, and you ask, how are you watching for, violation of policies, and they already have an organic process in place. We know there's already a security culture, or at least somewhat of a security culture in place. When the multidisciplinary team not only knows that, hey, I'm on this ad hoc committee, but there's a good chance that I'm going to be meeting every year on this ad hoc committee, because the team already knows intuitively if it's going to be done right, it's going to be done in iterations. We're going to take a maturity approach towards it rather than a yes-no approach, which is really kind of what you're seeing here in these maturity levels. We realize that, hey, you know what, if it's been off our radar, we're not going to get it done tomorrow. Let's get it on the radar, and let's get the first iteration out by the end of the year, or, all depending on the risk, maybe by the end of the quarter or whatever. But if the team understands that we're not going to be perfect the first time, heck, in fact, we don't even care if we're ever perfect. Now we have a security culture. The most important thing to know about a security culture is that there are fewer breaches, and when there is, and it's still a matter of when, not if, but when there is a breach, it's because we're actually tracking when we send that letter to the wrong person. Okay, and we are actually reporting that to our regulators or to our examiners, or however our policy requires us to report that, because you know what, that is a minor incident, but we've learned if we keep our close eye on the nickels and the dimes, it's much more likely that we're not going to lose track of the dollars and the $10 bills, right? And so that's what we see in a security culture. We don't see TMI as an acronym. As a matter of fact, we see people in a security culture bringing stuff to our attention that we didn't think to ask. Hey, can you take a look at this policy here? I know it's not in your scope, but it's something we did new, and we just want to make sure we're heading in the right direction. There's a difference between that organization and the organization that says, hey, they never asked about that policy, so don't give it to them because I'm worried they're going to find something wrong with it, now I'm going to have more work to do. That second organization, they've got dead birds on their network. They've already had breaches probably of their information security program. Whereas the organization that has already downloaded that board minutes checklist and given it to their board secretary saying, hey, can you let me know what's not in the board minutes? I want to make sure we populate those minutes between now and the next time we're audited. That company I just told you about, they're the ones that are aware of the dead birds, because like I said earlier, you probably have dead birds in your system already, but are you aware of where those dead birds are? And so, by the way, there is some new trending and talking going on that might eventually result in an examiner asking you what kind of expertise do you have from a cybersecurity perspective on your board of directors. We're already getting the call from clients asking us to be, an ad hoc member of their board, or to come in and speak to their board more often, because I feel like that might be because they're getting that question from their examiners already. But if you invest in board engagement, then your company will see information security as a customer service, not an inconvenience. If you invest in board engagement, you will have a better relationship with your examiners. you will be more ready for your audits. You still won't have every I dotted and every T crossed, I promise you that, but your auditors will be impressed with your audit readiness. If you invest in engaging with your board, there will be multidisciplinary teams, if for no other reason, because management wants to know what the heck it is you're going to say to their board of directors when you go in and talk to them again next month. Everybody will be working iterations. Birds will be flying together, right, Sophia? And most importantly, and I haven't talked about this yet, but we will also end up in an environment where self-reporting isn't even something we need to encourage. Okay, and I haven't talked about self-reporting, but it's the '1 way we can tell whether you have a security culture in place. And that is, do your employees report when they think they've clicked on the link, or do they just hope nothing will come of it? And so in an organization where you've invested in the board engagement, everybody realizes that it's not about perfection, that we're all going to make mistakes. And therefore, if I click on a link, I'm going to quickly get a hold of my supervisor and say, hey, I think I might have made a mistake. Let's fix this problem before it gets out of hand. And so that is pretty much the extent of what I want to talk about when it came to articulating canaries in a coal mine. Mike, were there any questions that came up while I was talking?
No, Dan, there was not. As always, you did a fabulous job. No questions currently. Again, thank you, Dan. And again, we will have an evaluation survey directly after this webinar, and then also being emailed to you as a follow-up. So if you could fill that out, we'd appreciate it. So I think it's only 3 or 4 questions now, so it's even shorter than it was before. We have also drawn our webinar winner for today. I will be in contact with that person. Congratulations. And again, thank you everybody for joining us today. Again, thank you, Dan, for your time and your very valuable information.
Thank you, everybody.
When you view an InfoTex webinar or movie, you do so with 4 caveats. First, you're agreeing to the terms posted at the web page listed on this slide. Second, our lawyers want you to know that what InfoTex presents is often time-dated or about new trends, regulations, or guidance, and therefore we cannot provide this material with any warranty whatsoever. Thirdly, material provided with InfoTex webinars and movies is copyrighted. You keep the copyright to material customized to your organization, but InfoTex reserves the right to use the material in other engagements and boilerplates. See our transfer of copyright agreement at the webpage listed in this slide. Finally, those who view our webinars or movies may be added to an email mailing list. If you do not wish to receive notice of additional educational opportunities, please accept our apologies and please opt out at the web page shown on this slide.